City Talks with Reuben Abati.
Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to another edition of your number one talk show, City Talks with Reuben Abati, on your number one lifestyle station, City 1051 FM. On this show, we talk about stories of political and human interest that affect us as Nigerian citizens and as members of a global human community. Today, we'll be discussing the proposed fuel subsidy removal. And to guide us through this, we're indeed privileged to have this special guest, Dr. Muda Yusuf, former Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, LCCI. He is an economist. Dr. Muda Yusuf is a former Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, as I said. He's an economist, and he has contributed immensely to the national economic discourse through his research-based analysis of policies of government as they affect various sectors of the Nigerian economy. Dr. Yusuf obtained his bachelor's degree in economics from the University of Ilorin and a master's degree in economics from the University of Lagos. He also holds a master's degree in business research and a doctorate degree in business administration, both from Swiss Business School in Switzerland. He has participated in various high-level public policy advocacy dialogues at both the federal and state levels with the aim of fostering private sector participation in Nigeria's economic development. He has represented the Nigerian private sector in several economic and business policy formulation and review processes at the state and national levels. He is a leading advocate of an enabling environment for the Nigerian private sector, and he has a vast knowledge and exposure in business research and economic policy issues affecting business. He has worked closely also with government agencies to ensure the creation of a conducive investment climate for the Nigerian private sector. He is, above all, a leading commentator on national economic and business policy issues. Dr. Muda Yusuf. If you want to be part of this conversation, you can call us on 0700 1051 1051. You can also leave comments on WhatsApp 09099 164403 and on social media accounts at CT1051 on Zoom and Facebook. Well, let me, on your behalf, welcome to this program today, Dr. Muda Yusuf. Dr. Muda Yusuf, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abati, and good afternoon to all our listeners and viewers.
Well, it's good to have you again on the program. Well, the big issue in town is about the proposed removal of petroleum subsidy. This is not a new subject. We've been on it for decades. Indeed, in 2012, the attempt by the Jonathan administration to deregulate the downstream sector resulted in protests that was tagged as October 2012 protests Occupy Nigeria. And now it looks like with the passing of the Petroleum Industry Bill, which is now the Petroleum Industry Act, the deregulation of the downstream sector is inevitable. Now, the big argument, well, maybe you will state that. Don't let me use that to detain us. But the IMF, the World Bank, they both recommended to Nigeria that if Nigeria does not effectively deregulate, the pump price of petrol by the first quarter of next year, it may even be very difficult for the country to pay salaries. The government is looking at June 2022. The Senate says this is not covered in the 2022 budget. There is no provision for it. But it looks like Nigeria is between the devil and the deep blue sea. What is the argument for deregulation, the removal of fuel subsidy, and can you as an economist tell Nigerians that we're faced with a fait accompli?
Thank you very much, Dr. Abati. Well, this is a very complex matter. Almost, you can even describe it as a conundrum. because of the complex nature of the subject. Unfortunately, there is so much emotions and sentiments that has been thrown into the conversation, which is almost obscuring the real facts of the matter. But the issue is that the economy is bleeding profusely on account of this fuel subsidy. And if you have an economy that is weak ab initio, economy that is struggling to recover from the recession, and you have this massive bleeding, and you don't do something very urgently to stop the bleeding, then we may end up crippling the entire economy in a manner that even those who are, the proponents or the forces against the subsidy, labor and the rest of them, you need to have an economy before you can even exist as a union. So that is the big issue. Of course, there are many angles to the discussion or to the conversation. There is the investment angle, which has to do with the fact that this sector, particularly the petroleum downstream sector, has been starved of investment. We have effectively blocked private capital into that space. Of course, it is very easy for labor and the rest to ride on the emotions of the people and put government in a very difficult position. That's from the days of Oshomole. But if there was anything that gave popularity to Oshomole, I think it was all these anti-fuel subsidy removal agitations. But the thing is that when you have this kind of policy that is blocking investment into a very critical sector, then it is the economy and the people that will pay for it. And we're already paying for it in a very, very big way. See what private investors have done in telecoms. See what private investors have done in aviation. See what they have done even in broadcasting, in the media, in the health sector, in the education, name the sector. A lot has happened in terms of transformation that the private sector and private investment has brought into all of these sectors. But here we are stuck with a very critical sector, and we have created a policy regime which allows only the government to function. All the refineries that you have had for over the past few decades are government-owned refineries. And what have we got in return for creating that kind of exclusivity for the public sector to remain in the petroleum downstream sector? Now all the refineries are not working. We have thrown so much money into it in the name of turnaround maintenance over the years. And yet they keep running this, incurring losses year in, year out. It is the people of Nigeria that are paying for this. So if you had allowed a policy regime, which the regulation offers, to allow investment to have been in that space over the last 2 decades, it would have been a completely different story now. So one strong argument in this is that we need a policy regime that will allow investment to be in private capital to go into that sector. That is one. The second major argument is what I call the revenue argument. Close to 40% or so of government revenue is committed to payment of subsidy. Now, how do you, as a country, a developing country for that matter, that has challenges with infrastructure, we have challenges with roads, with railways, we have challenges with our public health system, we have challenges with our public education system, we have challenges even with funding our security apparatus. And yet we are spending almost 40% of revenue on fuel subsidy. Now it calls to question what kind of priority we have even as a country. So the revenue effect is also a major effect. And you can see how that is also putting a lot of pressure on government. It is creating a whole lot of macroeconomic challenges. The debt profile is increasing. The fiscal deficit is increasing. Debt service component is increasing. And all of these things, one way or the other, is also affecting us as citizens. Then, because we have blocked investment into the sector, the revenue that government should have been realizing in terms of taxes, if the sector has been opened up, we are losing out on that. Look at how much taxes that the telecoms investors are paying to government, either in terms of corporate tax, income tax, VAT, whatever it is. It's a whole lot. And we're able to get all those investments, all those tax revenue, because we have private sector investors in the space. Well, here we are, a very big, robust sector. We have practically excluded the private sector from that space. So that again is a major argument, in favor of it. Then we have the employment effect. The private sector is the main provider of jobs, quality jobs for that matter. If you block investors to come into that sector, how are you going to create the jobs? Imagine if you had opened up the downstream sector over the past 20 years. Imagine how much employment will have been created, quality employment. Even labor will have even had more members in that sector on account of an increase in investment. Look at how many Nigerians are working in the telecom sector. Assume, for instance, that we insisted that Nitel should be the only one that remains there, and we did not open the sector. What story will you be telling today? Today we are talking of close to 200 million lines. Under Nitel, we were struggling with 300,000 lines. Under Nitel, before you can make a phone call to UK, you have to wake up early in the morning, 5 a.m., to go and queue in Nitel offices. These are the kind of things that private investment can bring into an economy. So the employment effect that we are being denied because we are not investing in the sector is also a major issue. Then we have the effect on our foreign reserves. Because we have consigned the refineries to the public sector because of the policy environment, the refineries are not working. The biggest import bill we have today in Nigeria is the importation of petroleum products. It's putting a lot of pressure on our reserves. It's creating the challenges even for the CBN to be able to fund the foreign exchange market. It's part of the problems we are having with the exchange rate depreciation. When practically all close to 50% or more of what we earn from oil for foreign exchange, we are also throwing it back into the importation of petroleum products. So there is a foreign reserves effect, there's an exchange rate effect. Then there is the issue about smuggling. Now we have been told that we are consuming 60 million liters of PMS per day. And the thing is that because the borders are porous, and in addition to the corruption also at the borders, a lot of this fuel is going out of the country. We are practically feeding the entire sub-region with PMS. It's something that is difficult to stop. Right now in Ghana and some of these other countries, PMS per liter is over 400 naira per liter, equivalent. And you have here 165 naira per liter. It's a no-brainer. Then all these fuels will be going to all these countries. That is why even as I speak to you, many of the states that have borders with all these countries, they are already solving crisis of petroleum products. Long queues are already beginning to emerge. It's not because there is no supplies to those areas. It's because of the very strong incentive to smuggle to those locations. That is also a major problem. I must admit, though, that there's a flip side to this. There's the social effect. Because we don't have functioning public transportation system and all of that. We remove the subsidy, we are likely to see an increase in transport fares. We are likely to see some implications for inflation and all of that. But we have to be careful not to also exaggerate the likely impact of this. I say this because all the trucks, almost 90% of the trucks that are moving goods across this country today are running on diesel. Diesel is already deregulated. Almost all the factories that are using generators are using generators that are running on diesel. Diesel has been deregulated. The same thing with kerosene. The same thing with aviation fuel. The only thing we are stuck with now in terms of this deregulation debate is the PMS. So I take the point, it will have some impact because we have SMEs and all of them that are using these small generators. We have some vehicles owned by individuals that also, all these commuter vehicles, a lot of them also run on petrol. I admit that. So there will be some impact on those. Then there's also likely to be a political implication or high political cost. That is where I worry about the political will to push through this particular removal, because the closer we are to 2023, the more difficult it will be for the government to take this very bold step. Because I must admit, the political cost is likely to be quite high.
Well, Doctor,
because if you are taking this kind of decisions, the opposition parties and all of that will easily latch on it and take it to begin to attack the government.
Yeah.
Then on the part
Doctor,
of labor, let me listen to you.
Okay, I mean, I was going to intervene and say that, well, you seem to have made a very strong case for the removal of petroleum subsidy or the deregulation of the downstream sector, which is the professional phrase that is used, by talking about the investment effect, the revenue effect, the employment effect, the foreign reserve effect, the exchange rate effect, the smuggling effect, and the social effect. But the question is, can this government summon the courage to do it? In 2012, the Jonathan administration tried it, but it had to backtrack, it had to back down. The accepted orthodoxy is that, the present regime is unsustainable. We're funding efficiency, we're funding opaqueness, and the Bretton Woods institutions tell us that it can't work. But you recall the Fitch rating by the Fitch Solutions Group during the week pointed out that, look, political reforms or any kind of reform, either in the electricity sector or in the oil and gas sector, will be hampered by the fact that by 2022, the government will be, more interested in politicking. And it's good you talked about the high political cost. Already, the National Association of Nigerian Students is saying that it will shut down the country. The Nigerian Labour Congress is protesting that it has not been consulted. And yet, we have this big issue on our hands. So it comes down to political will. Do you think that the Buhari administration will be able to summon the political will without any regard for the political cost that you defined to go ahead and just create a situation where the pump price of fuel will go up to between 320 naira per liter to 360 naira per liter, no matter how intelligent the economic arguments may be?
Well, I agree with you. I'm also not too confident that the government will have the political will to deal with this issue. Yes, it's already an act of the National Assembly. It's a law. But the fact that it's a law is not sufficient to confer full legitimacy on it. We need the buy-in of the people to make these things happen. So I know what the political actors can be. They are not speaking out so much. Those speaking out essentially maybe the technocrats, NNPC, and the rest of them. But when it comes to the point of taking the political decision to push it through, I imagine that people may begin to develop cold feet because a lot will now be at stake. People want to aspire to offices. People don't want the chances of the party to be jeopardized by this very big issue. But the impression that you have been given is that the government is ready to ensure that this thing goes ahead. But I also have my reservation. But I must say that in all of this, consultation is key. We can douse some of this tension if we scale up the scope and the quality of consultation and engagement. We need to bring on board all the critical stakeholders, and hopefully they will also see reason. Because some of those that are also stoking this anti-subsidy position, some of them are doing it genuinely because of the implications, the plight of the common people, and so on. But there are also elements that are also profiting from the status quo. Because those who are profiting are really making a kill from all of this subsidy thing. Because it's a huge corruption platform where people are just raking in billions of naira for doing practically nothing. We have seen the recent conviction by a court on account of this subsidy where people just change figures as to the amount of fuel they brought in. You know, we have all this petroleum equalization fund where, because you want to ensure that fuel is sold the same rate all over the country, people will pick fuel from Lagos. Maybe they end up in Ibadan and they go and claim a bridging allowance for taking the fuel to Kaduna or to Sokoto or to Maiduguri just by manipulating documents. You know, so the point I'm making is that we need to strengthen engagement, and we also need to get labor to be a lot more realistic, to be a lot more pragmatic, and to also think about the sustainability of this economy. Because, as they say, leadership is not a popularity contest. The fact that a policy is popular does not mean that it is sustainable, does not mean that it is something that is good for the economy or something that the future generation of this country will benefit from. Because what is happening now is that some of the position that has been taken, especially by Labour, is such that we don't care about what happens to future generations. Because you have the oil money, you have the something, you must exhaust everything. What are we going to show to our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren? How are we going to account for the oil revenue, oil wealth that God has given us over all these years? Because we are not investing in infrastructure. The road infrastructure is nothing to rattle about. We are not investing in rail. We don't have power. The health system is collapsing. Even the students' association that are protesting. Government is having serious issues in funding even education. ASU is going on strike every now and then. All of these things boil down to funding. And if the now government says now, okay, we want to save some money from here so that we can deal with some of these issues, and people still feel that it should not happen, then it's going to be, the consequences for the economy is going to be very serious. And not just for the economy, even for the whole country and for the whole economy. So there's a whole lot of engagement that needs to happen. And I think government needs to do a lot more in terms of engagement. There has to be some palliatives, at least to deal with the transitional issues. A proposal is already on the table. We don't know how far that will go because there are arguments for and against the proposal of 3,000 and all of that. 5,000 per month and so on. These are details that can be worked out. And I also noted your point about the fact that the National Assembly is saying it has not been consulted. Well, again, these are things that can be dealt with. What is important is to deal with the fundamentals of this issue so that this economy can move on. We cannot continue to commit the kind of resources we are committing to this subsidy and expect this economy to be sustainable.
Okay, let me take you back to the point you yourself made about the social effect. The expectation is that if the pump price of fuel goes up to between 320 naira per liter to 360 naira per liter, the Nigerians will face hyperinflation of unimaginable proportions. And what has been offered by the federal government is this 5,000 naira transport subsidy that you just referred to 40 million Nigerians. 40 million Nigerians out of over 220 million population. Even for COVID, we're told that the target population is 110 million eligible Nigerians for COVID vaccination. So in the first place, the figure itself raises a concern. And then who are these 40 million Nigerians who fall into the group of poor and vulnerable? And if the experience of the palliatives under COVID-19 pandemic is anything to go by, there are many Nigerians who are saying that, look, these 40 million Nigerians will probably not exist. How does government deal with that? My second question is, okay, what is different now between now and 2012 when the Jonathan administration tried to do exactly the same thing and Nigerians occupied the streets? Is there anything that is different this time around that would make Nigerians to accept the reality? Despite the fact that you talk about engagement, who is engaging Nigerians?
Well, on the proposal on the 5,000 naira for 40 million Nigerians, well, that is still a proposal. I imagine that all of these things are open for further engagement and further discussion. What is important is that government has demonstrated a willingness, at least, to put something on the table to cushion the effects of this, at least in the short term. Of course, there are concerns around the integrity of the database itself. We know what happened under this social investment program, how they were handling cash to people and all of that. So the integrity of the whole process, is something that we need to guarantee. And in doing that, what I expect the government to do is to get all the stakeholders on board and have a more robust discussion on how this should be managed. Government doesn't have the monopoly of knowledge on this. What is important is to ensure that the government is open and sincere and invite all the key stakeholders to be part of this conversation on how to mitigate the effects of this subsidy removal. Now, you talked about inflation going haywire and all of that. Again, I would like us to also be fairly to be cautious in the kind of view we have about the impact it will have on inflation. It may not be as high as a lot of people talk about. I already told you that 90% of the trucks that are moving goods and services across the country are running on diesel. This diesel has already been deregulated. In fact, if there is anything that even the business are complaining about now, is the fact that energy cost is already high. Because diesel is now well over 300 naira per liter. And it has been like that for about 3, 4, 5 months. Because they higher the crude oil price, they higher the cost of diesel. The same thing with kerosene, the same thing with aviation fuel. The SMEs that are using generators to run they are also running on diesel. So the cost of energy is already high for many operators in this economy. All these trailers that are moving up, and all of them are running on diesel. So, of course, there are components of this, all these commuter vehicles, and but I don't imagine that the kind of inflationary effect that people talk about, I don't think it will be as high as that. You may have 2-3% more, perhaps. But with time, I expect that some of these things will be moderated. But what is important in all of this?
Dr. Yusuf.
Yes.
Dr. Yusuf. The average man in Nigeria is saying yes, he knows that diesel has gone up. He's been suffering under the weight of the higher cost of diesel. He is aware that the cost of kerosene has gone up, and he's been suffering on account of that. He's also aware that cooking gas, domestic gas, having access to it is a nightmare. Almost 100% increase in the cost of the 12 kg cylinder of gas. And now, petrol. The cost of petrol is going also to double. What will you say to that average Nigerian who sees costs going up, his income per month is not going up, he's facing more hardship? Why should he be the one to make the sacrifice? Government promises the average Nigerian that the 4 refineries will be on stream, will be completed and functional before the first half of next year. What is the guarantee that that will happen? Government is saying that private refineries, led by the Dangote refinery that will produce 650,000 barrels per day, will also be ready. What is the guarantee that the Dangote refinery will be ready? And the 3 other modular refineries that government is talking about will also be ready. So the concern of the average man is not economistic. His concern is a practical, pragmatic one. Where will he be when neoliberalism kicks in and government completely deregulates the downstream sector? What can you say to that ordinary man who at the moment is anxious and who is going to be the most impacted? That's the big question in my view.
Well, that is a very important question. The expectation, and that is why I think the government also fixed the date of July for the effective date for this deregulation. The expectation is that by that time, the domestic refining capacity will have increased, namely from the Dangote refinery and possibly from the government's own refinery. That is that expectation, and we are hoping that that will materialize. For the average Nigerian, well, government has talked about the 5,000. That is neither here nor there. But the point that we need to make is that we are discussing because the boat is still afloat. If you continue to drive this economy in a way that the economy itself begins to sink, then all of us will pay for it very dearly. You know, apart from even getting the IMF and the World Bank involved, because people have all sorts of impressions when those Bretton Woods institutions get involved in a conversation like this. But the reality is that we are not running a system that is sustainable. It is only an economy that is still surviving that people will be talking about this will go up, that will not go up. But the thing, you can't give what you don't have. How can you have, maybe last year or so, we had a natural revenue of around 4 trillion or 4 point something trillion. Almost half of that is going into subsidy payment. A great proportion of that is going into people's pockets. A great proportion of that is going to those who are smuggling. I admit these arguments may be difficult to sell to the average Nigerian. But you see, leadership is also not about making popular decisions. Sometimes a leader is faced with very difficult choices. And that is where we are today. The choices are very difficult. You talked about 2012. I remember Comrade Adams Oshomole, who was the president of the NLC, and one of his biggest shows was all these anti-subsidy protests. As governor of Edo State, he was one that was saying that The subsidy was not sustainable. I remember at that time it was an occasion here in Lagos. He said it, that it wasn't sustainable. But although as a labor leader, he was on the other side. But when he found himself in government, it became clear to him that this was not a sustainable proposition. So I think we have to put the cards on the table. I go back again to the issue of educating the people. And I must also say that the media needs to also help the government here. Our opinion leaders need to help the government. Because if you look at the numbers are very clear. You know what is sustainable and what is not sustainable. It is not possible and again, if you have a liberalized regime, you talk about neoliberalism. Neoliberalism has brought a lot of value to this economy. City Talks is a private sector initiative. Arise is a private sector initiative. China's and they are private sector initiatives. If you did not liberalize the space, would they be there today? Look at how much jobs they have created. Look at how much value
I say you really have to go there.
Look at how much value they have brought into the economy. So I was saying that because of this neoliberal argument that some human rights and some of these people also talk about. The private investment has brought a lot to this economy. So again, coming back to your question, it's about engagement. You said what is different between now and what happened in 2012. There's nothing different. Nothing. But the thing is that the message has to be much stronger this time around to let the people know that this is the way to go. Otherwise, if we spend all our resources on fuel subsidy, well, that means other sectors will continue to suffer and all of us will suffer for it.
Okay. Dr. Yusuf, I get your point about engagement, communication. Yes, in 2012, part of the criticism of the Jonathan administration was that maybe not enough was done to engage the people and to carry them along. But see, the big problem we have, in my view, is a trust deficit. Nigerians no longer trust their government. You have government officials going about with a convoy of vehicles. You have state governors having over 100 special assistants. You have the Onronsaye report that nobody has taken any concrete step to, actualize. And the people say, oh, government keeps telling us our problem is not debt revenue, it's revenue problem. And yet they see spectacles of leakages, wastages. And then you come to them and you say, well, look, this fuel subsidy regime is unsustainable. We have to do correct pricing, that old phrase. Why should the people trust the government of Nigeria?
You see, I agree with you. The trust issue is there. We had a similar experience in 2012 when we had this enough is enough and all the rest. It's there. But even in spite of that, we need to stop this bleeding. Because if a patient is bleeding, I don't take steps to stop the bleeding, the patient may pass out completely. That is one. Secondly, in the process of engagement, we can bring on board all the critical stakeholders to see how we manage whatever savings accrues from this termination of this subsidy. What happens to savings at the local government level? What happens at the state level? What happens at the federal level? You remember, I think it was under the Abati administration, we had the Petroleum Trust Fund. It was a framework that was put in place to deal with the issue of trust. That, okay, we are going to make so much savings from this. We are setting up a different fund to deal with, it could be an investment fund. And we can bring everybody on board to be part of the management of that fund. That is one way I think we can deal with the issue of trust. The labor will be there. all the key civil society organizations will be part of the management of the fund. That, I think, is something that we can deal with. But again, I must emphasize that for this economy not to be entirely crippled, we need to do something about this subsidy.
So, on that note, Dr. Muda Yusuf will take a short break. And then when we return, we will invite our listeners and persons who joined us on social media to join the conversation so that we can have other perspectives. Removal of fuel subsidy. Kuvadis, Nigeria. We'll be right back after this break.
Snatch Life in Concert is here again. Get ready for an unforgettable family Christmas concert with Snatch and Friends. Featuring multi-award-winning gospel artists Todd Dulaney, USA, Adlin Cruz, Puerto Rico, Dedra Greathouse, USA, Ayo Vincent, Lagos, and the phenomenal Gos Gem Choir. Venue, the prestigious Monarch Event Center, Lekki. Date, 12th of December. Time, 3 p.m. Tickets are available on snatchmusic.com/events. The Palms Shopping Mall, all Filmhouse IMAX cinemas, all Genesis restaurants and cinema outlets. Make it a date as it promises to be a Christmas concert to remember.
Supported by City 1051 FM.
Can anybody hear me? If you can hear me, we're
Hey, everyone! Listen, gather around. Okay, I saw a monster!
Is back. For sponsorship and vendor booking, call 0803-512-6433. 2021. Are you ready for it?
Welcome back to City Talks with Reuben Abati on your favorite lifestyle station, City 1051 FM. And our guest is still Dr. Muda Yusuf, former Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, LCCI. And he's been talking about the proposed removal of fuel subsidy, or if you like, the proposed deregulation of the downstream sector by the Nigerian government in the second quarter of 2022. If you want to be part of this conversation, you can call us on 0700 1051 1051, or you can leave comments on WhatsApp 09099164403, and on social media accounts at City 1051 on Zoom and Facebook. Well, if you are there and you've been listening, as I said, our guest is Dr. Muda Yusuf, former Director General of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And he's been talking about the proposed removal of fuel subsidy. Do we have any caller on the line? Because we're devoting the rest of the program to your observations, comments, and questions.
Good afternoon, Dr. Reuben Abati.
Yes, thank you for joining us. Please go ahead.
Yeah,
yes.
AB from Songo.
AB from Songo. You're welcome.
Yes, I want to say that I remember when the Minister for Finance, former Minister for Finance, the Jonathan administration, he told Nigerians that we should privatize our salary. But salary privatized, that is number one. Number two, when Dr. Ibe Kachuku was the CGM of petroleum products, NNPC, he started doing, all our refineries were being put in place. The Warri refinery was already in place. Only Kaduna refinery, other refinery, Port Harcourt refinery in place. So at the time, we discovered that the whole thing was just the same. Why? Because of corruption. When he became Minister for Petroleum, he told us that between now and 2021 that this administration is going to be a thing of the past. We won't hear anything about subsidy again. But what are we having today? So I think what the government needs to do, by my own understanding, is that number one, we need to really work on all these subsidy of this. Look at the issue of those going to court today. Imagine you are supplying 6 metric tons to Nigeria, to the government, and yet you are writing 19 metric tons. And most of them are doing it. So I think the government needs to really go and really dip into all these atrocities. Even if it is the government, those who are appointed in government that are corrupt there, they need to show them out. These are the only way things will go back to normal. Then two, the 5,000 naira that they are planning to give to Nigerians. I'm not saying it being sustainable, because if you give 5,000 naira to 40 million Nigerians, assuming that's something trillion. Now, remove it, take it with the subsidy they are talking about. You discover that they are going to spend more. How many Nigerians will get that money? Look at the issue of that money they were giving to our children. They said they are home during COVID. Not how many of them they were feeding. So I think these are the things I expect Muda, our man there, to really look into it. God bless Nigeria in Jesus' name. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Muda Yusuf, do you want to respond to that, or we take more calls? Hello? I'm not hearing you in the studio. Hello, Dr. Muda Yusuf. Can you hear me? Hello? Okay, we'll take another call if there's a caller on the line.
Hello, good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Yes, is that City 105?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Doctor. I'm Gerald Odu from Sango, Ota, Ogun State. Can you hear me, sir?
Yes, please go ahead. I can hear you clearly,
okay.
And I hope Dr. Muda Yusuf can also hear you.
Okay. So I want to believe, I think even the layman on the street would expect that our refinery should be working first before you talk of subsidy, because the common man who actually get the burden of whatever comes at the end of the day, they are far more than the people that are rich. We expect the refineries, if not refineries, most of the refineries in the 6 zones of this country should be functional. Let it be visible. It will make it very easy for the government to convince Nigerians that they're actually ready. But if that is not done, and we are still importing fuel, which will take subsidy, it will be a very serious matter, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay, Dr. Yusuf, did you hear the first 2 callers complaining about refineries and the need to get the refineries working, and why, after a time when we were told that the refineries were working, all of a sudden that doesn't seem to be the case? Would you like to make a comment on that? Hello, I'm not hearing you in the studio. Please, can you unmute your system? Dr. Yusuf, please unmute your system. I'm not hearing you in the studio. Hello? I'm still not hearing you. Your system is muted at your end. Please unmute your audio. No, I can't hear you. I see you are trying to say something. But your system is muted. Hello, Dr. Yusuf, can you hear me? Yeah, you are saying you can hear me. I'm trying to read your lips, but I can't hear you here because your system is muted. No, I can't hear a word. Okay, we'll take the next caller while we're trying to sort that out. Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Yes,
Hello,
good afternoon. Yeah.
Dr. Reuben, Abati, yeah. You have a teaching doctor from Ikeja. And I say good morning to Dr. Yusuf. He's a familiar voice and person as well. But this afternoon, I must say I am disappointed in his contribution for the first time, because he never held a balanced perspective on this program. Yes, his campaign of canvassing for liberalization or liberalism is fair enough, but the second leg of it, which he has fully applicated as a balanced analyst on this issue, is the area of the people who run the economy. Maybe he may have tried to
Can I speak now?
It is not. Can you hear me?
Hold on, please. I can hear you now, but you have to hold on for this, caller to complete his.
Okay. Thank you. And I'm sure Mr. Muda, you can hear me as well. Yeah. See, the aspect is that you asked him a fundamental question. Between now and 2012, what has changed? He said the situation is not the same. In 2012, with 90 naira, 80 naira, 100 naira, you buy a spaghetti. That is a roll of spaghetti, irrespective of its brand. But today, you use another 350 or 400. That time, you will fill your gas with just 150, 200 per kg. Today, it is 750, 800 and more. So the situations are not the same. And why I'm even more angry is because I supported this government coming in 2015, although 2016 I opted and I stopped supporting the government when the government increased the fuel in June 2016, because I thought this was a betrayal. If Bibi Katuku, the former minister, told us they were going to get the refinery up and running by 2018, and he even promised that 2019, if that was not done, he's going to resign. But what has happened up to today? This is a government who says is gap care, is honest, is whatever, integrity, and the corruption in the turnaround maintenance is whatever is still going on. They are still paying people for doing nothing. And you want to come and tell me now that you want to remove subsidy, and by doing so, you are going to make life better. In 2019, around August, October, when another increment was done, this is what Mr. Yusuf has not even factored into his argument. That time, about the same time, he had the new economic team, Professor Salami, Bismarck Rewani, and this new governor elect in Anambra, and many more. That was the same time he closed the border, and the prices of commodities got high again. And it has continued that way. And if you look at the value of Naira, because it's an economy, that's why I'm just being technical here. The value of Naira at these different times, they are very, very different cases. And if you now look at the number of poor people Buhari has manufactured between that 2015 and today, that you will know that it's the biggest calamity that has befallen this country. Let me now refer to 1957-58, when Awolowo was the finance minister under Gowon. At that time, Nigeria was going through the civil war. The Bretton Woods institution forced Nigeria many times that Awolowo should devalue our currency, but Awolowo never did. So advices from this Bretton Woods institution is not sacrosanct. It does not mean that we don't have people who are knowledgeable, who are pragmatic enough to handle our strategy. Do you know what actually that is to do to Nigeria? My solution is this. In the 6.5 years of Buhari, if Buhari really wanted to solve the problem of subsidy, which of course he called, including myself, we called the scam, then there should be a transition. And that transition, like he has promised and increased the fuel price more than 6 times now between 2015 and now, is already showing that this government has that integrity and the technical capacity to run whatever they are promising now. People though it's just like something they are just thinking about just last week, because if they have been thinking about this, they would have included it in the appropriation bill of 2022. So for me, there's no hope under this administration, and truly and honestly, I don't believe that you should run this up because we need better people to manage our economy, people who really understand, people who really talk and do exactly what they say, not people who have that integrity like they have seen under this administration. And let us make it clear again. Continue to inconvenience Nigerian people, continue to throw us into more poverty. The resultant effect is the global insecurity you are seeing everywhere. 2013, remember, October 31st, 2013, there was the end of the privatization of power industry. What are we saying today? 2015 of Buhari, today, have you improved on that? How much are Nigeria still paying? So if they are coming out to tell me now that it's going to do this, it's a big lie. It's a big lie. It's a big lie. If they are going everywhere to borrow money and they want to run Nigeria,
hello,
let them reduce the cost we are paying them.
Okay, I think your point is well made. Let's now give Dr. Muda Yusuf to respond to the points that have been raised by the last three callers. From refineries not working and what should come first, whether it's the chicken or the egg, to this comment about Dr. Muda Yusuf not being balanced enough in his commentary. Dr. Muda Yusuf, it's good to have you back via audio.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I agree to a large extent with the comments that have been made. I mean, they are quite germane. Things are very difficult. And I must also admit that we have very serious macroeconomic challenges. One of the commentators talked about the exchange rate, about inflation, unemployment, and all of those things. Of course, those problems are there. Those are serious macroeconomic challenges, which requires other forms of solutions beyond even the oil subsidy. Because, of course, there are issues around how the economy itself is managed, how the monetary policy environment is managed, how the exchange rate, foreign exchange policy space is also managed. We have issues of fiscal deficit, we have issues of debt management. There are a whole lot of macroeconomic issues that are bedeviling the country. And of course, we also have structural issues. We have institutional and regulatory issues. So we have to deal with all of those things in their own different compartments. But as far as, well, the other commentator also talked about the refineries. The challenge with the refineries is that they are public sector owned and operated. And we know what it is when you leave critical enterprises in the domain of the public sector. So that means you have handed over the refineries to bureaucrats and to politicians. And the outcome is what we're experiencing today. If the refineries were being managed by the private sector, we will not have a situation where the entire refineries will collapse. And we are now spending humongous amounts to import petroleum products. So part of the arguments in favor of this reform is that it will open up the space for more private sector participation in the downstream sector, particularly the refineries. Because right now, the policy environment does not allow the private sector to play. And the private sector can bring a whole lot of value into that space. Chicken and egg, do we wait for the refineries to work before this? That's another debatable issue. But for me, it is better to allow the reform to take place, to put in place whatever palliatives we put in place to manage the transitional period of this reform, then the economy will be up and running. But the pains that people go through and all of that, of course, we're all in this economy together. Things are very difficult for the average man, for the poor man and all of that, even for those who are not so average. The middle class, a lot of people are facing challenges. But again, it's a very difficult choice. These are moments for very difficult decisions. This reform is something that needs to happen. We can discuss the strategy of how to mitigate the pains and all of that, but it's something that needs to happen if we must continue to keep this economy on its feet.
Well, on that note, Dr. Muda Yusuf, I would like to thank you very much for taking time out to join us on the program this week, City Talks with Reuben Abati. And I also like to thank all our callers and those who reach out to us on Zoom and Facebook. Remember, the conversation does not end here. You can reach out to me on my social media account, and that is at Abati1990 on Instagram, and also at City1051 on all social media platforms. For those of you who tuned in late, no need to worry. You can visit our YouTube page, City1051, to watch the entire show in a couple of minutes. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button and leave comments. And don't forget also to tune in next week at 12 noon for another exciting edition of City Talks. My name is Reuben Abati. The show was produced by Adedoja Allen, Abiodun Odunton, Ayodamola Oludara, Bello Akim, and Oluwaseun Adetitun. Thank you very much for joining us on today's edition of City Talks with Reuben Abati. We'll see you again next Saturday. Thank you. Bye for now.
City Talks with Reuben Abati.